Hi, Sonia, and let's break down your sketches. So, they're looking pretty good so far. Let's hide this and show this beauty. I think it works pretty well. I really like the variation on widths, nice shapes, so all that is pretty cool. I think this effect is really nice. I think that is pretty cool, especially this variation in the glow and in the line widths of the electric stuff. So I think the scene that we can talk about here is scale and clarity and how we can break it down a bit. So I think the good starting point here is this effect. So design wise, it has a nice variation of masses. We have small, medium, big, small, very small, a bit bigger. So I think that works very well. So in this regard, I think it's looking really good. So the thing that we can push here is the variation of weights. I think we can push it even more. So right now, it kind of feels like we're getting too similar here, and maybe we can push some areas. So let's try something out quickly. I think right here is a good moment to push the weights a bit more. And right here is a good moment to push it even more. And you can make it smooth, you can make it sharp. That's up to you. I think we can push some stuff here to make it a bit less straight at the top and give a bit more variety to this thing here. And then we can simplify stuff a bit in terms of lines. So the thing that I pushed here is if you look at this element, at this element, and at this element, they're a bit different, which is good, but they're a bit too similar, so that it gets symmetrical. If we look at it, this element repeats, and the amount how much it goes to the left is roughly equal to how much it goes to the right. So this line acts like a center line almost, dividing it into two halves. I pushed the variation of width here a bit to make it a bit more expressive and to add some more variation. But aside from that, it's a really nice effect and it's looking pretty cool. So that aside, if we want to give it more directional energy, if that was our goal, I would push this element maybe a bit more straight up. So give it a slight angle, but give it a bit less angle that we're getting here. And this will give us a bit more energy because straighter lines usually have more energy to them. And if we are going straight here, then keeping it slightly more straight, slightly more directional in here will give us more energy transfer. Right now, the majority of the direction and energy is directed in this direction. You can notice it by looking at these angles. I also think that looking at it from this perspective, we can make these two lines a bit less parallel if you want to, but it depends. So if we would hit here more in this direction, then it would make sense for the lines to push in that direction roughly, because that's our direction of power. Right now that seems to be the direction of power here. If we are hitting here, I think we can balance it out a bit more and maybe push this more to the left to create kind of like, okay, we're going here, but then we're going here, and we are directing the attention and we are directing the energy towards the point that we're hitting. Because right now we're directing all of the attention and all of the energy in this direction, somewhere here. Whereas in this case, we're directing attention and energy to this point by having this kind of flow of lines. And here we're getting this flow of lines. Okay, next one. So this one, I think it's looking really good. It's looking really nice and pretty. I really like the width change, variation, all that stuff. So the thing here, it depends on the scale. So let's talk about that a bit. So depending on how stylized our project is and depending on the scale of the effect, the shape should change a bit to suggest the scale. So if we look at the thunderbolts in real life, we'll notice that uh, they're not that wobbly, or rather the size of waves on the bolt is relatively small compared to the size of the bolt itself. So if you look here, the waves are present, but if you look at the size of the bolt compared to the size of this wiggly stuff, we'll notice that it's relatively small. Another good example. So it has that wobbly energy, but the scale of it is much smaller, and that's what sells the size of it. Because even though electricity can go wild like that, when we see it up close, it looks like that. But when we zoom out really far, all of these small variation become just this kind of stuff. So it stops being as wobbly direction-wise. So if you look at it here, so I think it's looking pretty fun. So if we want to really sell the scale of it, I think we can push it and make the variations a bit smaller compared to the length of the bolt itself. So we're still having these scenes and stuff, but each one of them doesn't deviate from the main direction and main energy as much. And this will really sell the scale of the bolt. So that's the most important thing I wanted to talk about. The second thing that we can also talk about here is some compositional things. So right now, I think we can push some of the connections. So you see, we have this connection, and they all kind of create this level. And we can notice that we are starting to divide the energy in a bit predictable way. I'm not sure if that's really clear, but if we put these lines and look at it compositionally, so this is divides the energy kind of in half, and we have these lines that really divide it in half. And if we look here, we're also dividing it by this line kind of in half with similar shaping. And if we look at overall structure here, I think it's actually looking pretty good. So, maybe, yeah, I think that's what I'm looking at. So if you look at it this way, you'll notice that we always seem to push the energy predominantly in one direction here, and this is to the right side. So we have this kind of curvature, and the angles, if we really look close, so this is angle here, this is angle here, this is angle here, and this is angle here. And so this ones and this one, they're very similar, and this one is also pretty similar enough so that it reads like it also has a scene. And if you take a moment, we'll notice that the lengths of these segments until they are broken up, so this segment until it's broken up here, this segment until it's broken up here, this segment, they're also quite similar in size. So I think it would be nice to break it up a bit. So right now, you can clearly see it if I divide it like that. So we get very clear, very similar division in space here. And if we divide it here, we'll notice that it has the same kind of issue. So a good way to solve that would be to simplify some of them, give them slightly different directions, and make sure that we are dividing it evenly. So one segment, so the same thing that you did here, dividing it in uneven segments, the same thing we need to do here. We need to make sure that we are not getting even segmentation. So we need to get variety of angles, we need to get variety of directions, and we need to make sure that it's staying clear and directional, and that the segments aren't too similar. So we can push it in a lot of ways, but mostly that. The shape language seems to be pretty fine. Again, we can simplify some stuff and make the variation of weights a bit smaller. So right here, I think it's working pretty nice. It might be a bit busy, and part of it is that we have a lot of variation in width and amplitude, or rather we have a lot of like this kind of stuff everywhere, and then we don't have a lot of moments, a lot of places where it's more simple. So I think we can balance it out a bit more and maybe bring these smaller charges a bit further in space or take them back. So kind of play with them a bit more so they don't just connect the internal charges, but rather they have their own actions as well. So let's see, maybe we can come up with something cool. So say this is our foundation, and it's pretty detailed and complex as is. So then can push in the variety a bit. So then when we add secondary layers and secondary charges, we have to be careful not to make it too complex and hard to read, because this is pretty complex even when it's static. And when it's dynamic, it will be even more complex because all of this stuff will be changing and moving every couple frames. Maybe this has combined smaller charge and bigger charge. And there is some small stuff over here. Maybe there's a chaotic element somewhere over here. So this is still quite complex, but we have some smaller areas or bigger areas where it's a bit more simple and it's a bit easier to read, even though that is still pretty complex. Because right now I'm worried that it's getting a bit too tight in these kind of areas and we're getting a lot of variations. So the thing that we can do here is simplify some of these edges here. This can also help us with complexity a bit. So maybe this edge goes like this edge goes like this. We are removing this element here. And keeping maybe the bottom arc or the top arc here. Maybe the bottom arc is a smaller, thinner element. Etc. So, hope that helps. Another thing that we can push is make sure that these charges don't become too similar and parallel, like this. And maybe they kind of form also a bit similar scenes. And that's it. Good luck with your sketches and animations.